Hey, are you hiring? If you answered yes, let XenTegra Staffing help staff your IT people needs. Head over to XenTegra.com/XenTegra Staffing to find out more. XenTegra Staffing, we can staff your IT people needs. Welcome to another edition of the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton, your source for all things Citrix.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 54 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I've got with me a couple guys today. Trevor Mansell, who's the CIO of XenTegra Connect, which is our support and managed services and hosting business that works with our clients that, get a little more strategic with us and want us to play an active role in managing their IT environments, specifically around Citrix. That's what we're known for. But we can do a lot more than that. Trevor, how's it going?
That's great. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So, Trevor, this podcast today around NVIDIA and optimizing Citrix workloads to work with NVIDIA, that's something that you and your team have been doing a lot with recently, right?
We have. I mean, I think this has been kind of the topic of the quarter or the year almost. So, it's definitely something that we've been kind of in the middle of. It's obviously something that we've been doing from a Citrix point of view for a long time, but I think it's kind of turned a new corner and has new motivations behind it. So it's a lot of good stuff there, though, for sure.
Well, before we dig in too deep, we also have with us our weekly guest host, and Ben Rogers. Ben's a local sales engineer for Citrix here in the Charlotte area. Ben, how's it going?
Good, Andy. Always a pleasure to be here.
And we were talking before the podcast, you and Trevor both, about just getting through the Thanksgiving holiday and getting back to work and trying to close out the year and continue to do these podcasts and give people more insight into what we're talking about behind the scenes. So with that, let's jump into, there's a blog, I don't have the author, it was written by a group of people. The title of the blog is NVIDIA and Citrix, Optimizing Remote Work for Digital Workspaces. XenTegra is 8 years old. This conversation around adding graphics, virtual or physical hardware to your virtual desktop and virtual app computing has been around longer than that. And I remember one of the first things we did at XenTegra is we grabbed a server and threw some graphics cards in it and recorded some videos of using virtual desktop solutions from an airplane, while flying somewhere. And that was exciting and fun. And you can still find that if you just Google Citrix on a plane. You'll probably find those recordings from 8 years ago or so. But it's an interesting topic because, first of all, I'll say one of the things I say all the time when I have this conversation. We're trying, in the world of virtual desktop computing, we're trying to replace what normally would have gone from a graphics card, either a dedicated one or a system integrated one, to the monitor over that little bitty cable. We're putting that on the network now, and that creates all kinds of overhead and latency and things that have to be addressed. Or do they have to be addressed? In some cases, it has to be addressed, but in some cases we do that by power and magic in the protocols. In some cases, we need to add a little more horsepower around graphics processing, and that's become even more important this year when more and more people are working remote, and they're going to expect that user experience to be as good as it possibly can be. So I think with that, let's jump into, Trevor, why is 2020 and the pandemic and remote workers driving your team to investigate more what NVIDIA is doing to optimize this virtual compute experience?
Yeah, I think you've got two main groups of people, right? You've got the people that were already deploying remote, like a remote desktop app type solution, and they now, are sent everybody home, and so that solution became, increasingly more important to that organization, right? And so with that, everybody, more eyes are on the solution. They're wanting to do more with it typically. So one of the big things is, Microsoft Teams, Slack, a lot of the collaboration stuff. right in the middle of that. And so there's that group that's driving, they're taking second looks at, I knew we could do some of this, but I really didn't, want to, whether it was they thought they were going to have to spend a whole lot more money, or they, it really wasn't, high on their priority. Then you've got, companies that are, hey, they weren't really doing much of remote computing. Maybe they were kind of doing everything through remote, through VPN, and now they're looking at security. They're looking at all the things that will drive you to a Citrix solution or similar. And hey, who doesn't, who isn't deploying a collab type solution with video in it right now, and it gets really, if you want a cohesive workspace, I mean, this is really that last thing that, everybody has struggled with or is struggling with. So yeah, it's a lot, and there's a lot of reasons why, and they haven't all gone away.
So Trevor, typically when we talk about virtual desktop computing and virtual app computing, we have three categories for users. We have task workers, we have knowledge workers, and then we have power users. I think for this conversation, right, the task worker, it's questionable whether they really need the power of graphics processing, but it can't hurt. I mean, just Windows 10 and Office all by themselves can benefit from it. But then when you get to that knowledge worker and then that power user, these conversations become almost imperative to at least have. Whether or not you use it or not, it's a whole other conversation, but you at least have to have the conversation. And I think what you're pointing out is a lot of companies ran right into that when they started trying to have a completely remote workforce, or a workforce that was remote a big percentage of the time, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, we've been around for a while. I mean, the use case for this in the past has really been around 3D graphic applications, the engineers and things like that, but designers. But that's not really, that's not necessarily the driver of, what we're talking about today. It's kind of the average user that wants to watch video in their workspace, or collaborate with other people on their team. And that's really, that use case is the one that is kind of, has been neglected, I guess. I think most people, a lot of customers are just like, well, if you want to go watch video, you're going to have to get outside your virtual desktop and do it local. And that's just not really cutting it anymore for anything beyond the task worker, like you said.
I do want to clarify one thing here, and this is where I was confused when I first got into the space 10 years ago, and that is, this doesn't necessarily make the protocol that's delivering the solution a lot better. It does, but the real win here is what happens inside that virtual desktop workload, where we're not having to use virtual hardware to offload these capabilities. We're able to do that. We're not having to use the CPU, the vCPU and memory as much as we would if we can actually offload that to some type of physical or virtual dedicated gear, so that it frees up resources in the virtual app or desktop server to do its job. And that's what really benefits the end user, is that extra horsepower. It's almost like taking a standard V6 engine and throwing a turbocharger on it. You would have got where you were going with the standard V6, but having that turbocharger when you need to climb a hill or pull something or pass, that's when that extra compute power shows up and becomes necessary. But you can't do that on the spur of the moment. You've got to plan for it. Just like, a turbocharged car, you got to get that in there from day one and plan around it, knowing that it might not be used all the time, but when it is needed, it's needed.
Yeah, no.
Hey, Trevor, I have a question for you. You said you've seen a big uptick with this since the pandemic and companies trying to get to remote work from home. Have you seen a particular industry that has invested in this more than others? Could you kind of break it down for us as far as industries and industry demands on this type of technology?
Yeah, it's a little bit across the board because, you know, we're going into, but I think you can follow the money a little bit too. I think the people that have, you know, anything in the more regulated areas are going to, you know, have a little bit bigger budgets. And, but to be honest with you, I mean, it's become such a problem, you know, it really kind of, we're seeing customers in manufacturing, which traditionally aren't, you know, don't have the largest IT budgets, and we're seeing them, you know, banks are like, we're seeing a lot in the finance and the banking area right now. That's definitely a one that I think stands out more than others, for sure.
See, like for me today, when I started reading this blog, the first thing that kind of came to my mind is education. You know, I've talked to a lot of universities that have these labs, and now they don't have students at the university, and so they're trying to figure out how can they leverage these labs, you know, or deliver the content of these labs through a remote session. So we've heard it a lot there. And then I would also think that healthcare would be a driver for this, particularly with COVID, and you now have a lot of, you know, primary care physicians that are moving to telemedicine and the demands of doing telemedicine on the machines and, you know, trying to virtualize that load. So it'll be interesting to me to see over the next year, as we do move to a more, you know, remote workforce, how industries will invest in this type of technology.
Yeah, for sure. But hey, I mean, think about, if you start digging into it, you realize that, I mean, I think there is obviously, there is the cost, but there's offset to that cost as well. I think some people don't realize is, if you're just in your standard desktop, whether it's the ribbon in your office, you know, your office apps, or it's the, you know, the Windows 10, you know, some of the Windows 10 features, they use GPU. And if you don't have a GPU, they're using, you know, your CPU to do that in software. And so there's overhead for that. So right out of the gate, you know, if you architect it right, you're going to get a payback, you know, and be able to scale higher with being able to, you know, offload that, you know, a lot of that stuff to GPU, you know, just, you know, before you even get into the video side of it.
So guys, there's a couple topics to bring up here. One is, most people don't realize that every physical computer, PC they're using has a graphics acceleration in it, whether, again, it's system board integrated or whether it's outside the system board. It's also good to point out that most people today don't use graphics enhancement in their virtual desktops, and their users don't know any different because they've never experienced it. I can tell you firsthand, if you go side by side, one with and one without, that's when all of a sudden you start noticing. I think a lot of our users have kind of just accepted the fact that when your desktop is virtual and it's over some distance, or virtual just in general, let's just say virtual, there's a degraded user experience and they just have to live with it. I think that's one of the things that we as a group have to make sure we educate people on, that it doesn't have to be that way, because it all comes back to our charter in this space around EUC is, you know, happy users are what we're looking to have here, and then we have to turn around and factor that in, what the cost of that would be. Ben, did you ever do any testing in your previous environment and try to figure out which users could truly benefit and which users could go without and not realize they were going without?
We actually did get this off the ground and had it implemented before I left CNSA. And so we were triggering for the doctors, and particularly ones that were doing call. So, you know, when we started today's meeting, I told you that I kind of could put this in the three categories of the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so the good for us was those doctors that were on call that did come into a session that had a virtual GPU tied to it. they had a much more video-rich experience, especially going from, MRIs to X-rays to CTs and scanning across those scans. Definitely an improvement there. The bad of it for me, honestly, is it was hard to get implemented. The NVIDIA Grid software at the time, and I'm very interested to hear what Trevor's comments are on this in today's standards. It was difficult to get running, and then the maintenance. I had X number of hypervisor hardware running, and we had these GPUs and these hypervisors, but I didn't have the GPUs installed in all of the hypervisor servers. So what I had to end up doing was tying specific users to specific servers so that they guaranteed those GPUs. And what I really wanted to be able to do is have them float and be contextually aware of they're inside of a trauma session, give them the GPU versus they're inside of an office session and not need it. So those are some of the things that I would like to hear about. Has that been made easier, and is it, easier to have it deployed amongst, different populations of users inside your environment? Does that make sense?
It does. You kind of wanted it to be dynamic. Trevor, do you want to talk through any gains that have been made there?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that I would say is, that is possible now that wasn't not too long ago was the ability to to vMotion those instances across platform. But I think what you're saying is that if you have a stack, a group of servers that don't have GPU, and then you have some that do, and you're trying to balance them across. I think that's I think there's enough technology and features there to accomplish it. But I think, is it going to be easier? I think you just need to pre-plan and plan it out a little bit differently in that scenario. A lot of what we do is we typically are, cover that whole, that worker is going to be, is not switching back and forth from a dedicated host. But I don't know that it's a huge issue. Because you can kind of break that up by, through the delivery group layer, but hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, it's funny, as we're doing this podcast, my email popped up, and one of our other vendors, a monitoring company, the title of their email, their subject line is making 2021 the year of employee experience. I think, we're all shooting for that, and that should be our goal. At the same time, where do we draw the line in terms of cost? Trevor, I think what I just heard you say is the plan should be to have a holistic approach and decide, where you're going to put it across the spectrum and different types of graphics enhancements, and put your users into those buckets and then roll with it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, I think that's, and honestly, what we're talking about, we're not talking about dedicating full GPUs to users, right? We're carving out, dedicated memory, or we're sharing that memory across the user groups, and you're not typically, you have to figure, one of the things you have to figure out is how many users are you going to have on a Teams call or doing, full video at one time? That's the number that you're really kind of designing around. So, I think a lot of people will realize, a little bit is a whole lot better than none is what you're going to find, right? So if you can, and so I think just based on you need to design it properly, but just from a cost to benefit ratio, you can, just having a little bit in there is going to make a whole lot of difference for those areas that we're really talking about. It's really hey, I'm sharing my screen in Teams, or I'm watching someone in Teams, and or playing back video and that type of thing. That's really that's really where you just need that additional piece in this solution to really make a user feel like it's a smooth experience, right? It kind of, and I don't think you don't have to design it. We've got customers that do like app, game development, and they need the full horsepower, and yeah, you're gonna pay for that, and that's for this, it's really about setting, just up leveling where you are to kind of meet these last things that are pretty crucial.
So Trevor, when you meet with a new client these days, is it a conversation you lead with and help them understand different degrees of GPU enhancement, or is it something you guys kind of opt into after the conversation has gotten a little further?
Well, I think it used to be kind of a little, once it's kind of an educational process, right? So if we're dealing with a customer that is very familiar with, rolling out a remote desktop type solution, you're gonna get into that conversation about video a lot quicker. But these days, that's what everybody, that's one of the requirements, right? That pops up very quick, whether, no matter how educated the customer is, around these solutions that we're talking about. So, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Ben, you're out meeting with people all the time. Is this still a topic they ask you about, or do you have to kind of bring it up to them, or is it just not talked about that much?
We don't run across it about much, Mainly for me, it's been in education, and we've had some healthcare clients ask about it, and surprisingly, it has been around Teams and the ability to, do on-demand conferencing and also telemedicine and teleradiology across Teams channels. So I think it's interesting that Trevor's, kind of hitting the nail on the head here, that Teams is going to drive some of this into the future. Trevor, have you had an environment where somebody had tried to use Teams to do 100% of their communication? They had gotten away from the phone. They were now using USB headsets. And have you had an environment where you've had to deliver kind of a call center through Teams with virtualized desktops?
Yeah, I mean, that is, we actually do have more and more customers that are wanting to, take a shot at consolidating the voice with Teams. We've got a few of those, and there's actually some really, a lot of people have kind of shied away from doing that with Skype, for business, but with Teams, they've got these direct routing partners, so you can partner with a traditional telecom network VoIP type company that has integration with Teams. So we've definitely seen people taking that more seriously than they have in the past. But I would say the more common scenario is they already have another VoIP type solution, and they have Teams. And yeah, some of them are gonna, some of them do have use cases like call centers, that where they're trying to get rid of the phone set, that cost of the phone set for those agents, and go to a soft phone. And yeah, it's I'll tell you, the voice part is definitely a whole different conversation, right? GPU it's not doing anything for that side of it, really. Where it's that video, that crushing, the crushing video, and but I going back to what you just said, though, you haven't, you said you haven't heard, you haven't had a lot of these conversations, but when I heard you say that, my first reaction is, well, most of those customers think that it's just going to happen magically, right? I mean, I think you go, well, yeah, we're rolling out a workspace, and you hear there's integration with Teams, or this particular solution that integrates with Citrix, the Citrix CVAD, and I think there's a lot of assumptions that are made around this, and I mean, there's a lot of sausage that, that gets made in the back to deliver voice, hot real-time video and voice in these desktops. But it's because a lot of it's at the, as you know, I mean, it's at the application layer really is what determines a lot of this. Even though I have GPU, it's not necessarily a magic wand for every type of real-time video out there, right? Or voice. You have to look at that solution and how it's delivering it. Is it H.264 or whatever the protocol is that it's using, and seeing if it's going to meet your requirements, right? So you're not getting away from going through that exercise necessarily, but what we've done is we've done that for our hosted, some of our hosted customers, and have come up with some really good cohesive solutions that basically are a combination of using GPU, but also using, the optimizations that come with Citrix natively. So with the Teams optimization, like Ring Central optimization, and as you know, a lot of those, those tools that have been there and been around for a while. A lot of them have been are doing that redirection and superimposing that video, and they're great, but they have some limitations. So what we've what we've done is we've taken those optimizations, we combine them with being able to take and share physical GPU memory out to this user base, and come up with some really great solutions that are cohesive and they work, right? So we get pretty excited about it. It's not, I don't want to overstate it that it's a magic wand, and that, because there is a lot of complexities when you get into this. But if you can lay out your solutions that you're going to be using for VoIP and your top 5 video or real-time video uses, a lot of times we can cover the majority of that, between those two items that I mentioned. Does that make sense?
And guys, I'm sorry to keep bringing this back to my automotive examples, but I really do like what we're talking about here, and the concept of it's become more cost effective. It's gotten more integrated. You never know when you're going to need it. One of my mini cars is a Ford that has the EcoBoost engine, and you're talking about an F-150 or a Ford Expedition, a large car that you don't really need that you need that power when you need it, or maybe it's a sedan of some type, but it's almost become normal not to throw in a big V8 or something larger, and just to have, just the power of the turbo as you need it. I guess I'm kind of talking myself out of it as I say that, because at the same time, the idea of you can't just, I guess going back to Ben's comment a while ago, it would be super awesome if you could just throw in at the time you need it, the graphics acceleration. But I guess we're at a point where, just like with my car example, you've got to have it. You've got to have it there all the time. You just got to make it cost effective and efficient and integrated as much as possible, and know that it's there when you need it. Am I making sense with this?
Well, yeah. One of my questions for Trevor is what's the delivery model look like? So, let's take my old company that I work for, and let's say, I've got 50 power users that I need to make sure every time I deliver a desktop to them, I want it to be a, GPU-rich VDI session, but I don't want to own that. I want to come to a company like XenTegra and have you deliver that to me through a cloud model. What does that look like? How's that conversation sound to customers?
Yes. The answer is yes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so there's a couple vehicles that we typically go at. So we have our hosted solution, our DAS solution that we have that we leverage Equinix for a data center provider. But yeah, so that's definitely something that we can provide, right? And then the other one that is very, a lot of people are heading to the public cloud, right? And in some form, some level or form or fashion. And we're a big Microsoft partner and Azure partner. And so what's cool about what Azure just released not too long ago was their NV instances that have AMD GPU in them. And I'll tell you what, I mean, it's if you look at the cost of those compared to, some of the previous GPU enabled VMs, and it really looks attractive, right? And I don't, and so if you're, when you get into a cost scenario, if you want to do full VDI with GPU in the public cloud, it is definitely reasonable from a cost perspective to do it. When leveraging some of these new instance types. So, yeah, I mean that's there's just good option, good options now. It's not, and that goes. And the one thing about that scenario is that you can turn it off, right? So, and you can have mixed instance types and. It can be for Azure anyways, you can do multi-session Windows 10 in that whole mix as well. So
Andy, what's going to be neat to see with this in the next couple of years is, right now everybody's talking about voice over IP and call centers being done with voice. We're going to get to the point that it's going to be, video call centers, and you're going to have video calls coming in through Teams, and they'll be queued up, and while the user's waiting on an agent, they'll be streamed a video about the company or about the product, or streamed to a website. So it's going to be really exciting to see. But to everybody's point on the call here, as those services come to market, and there'll be subscription services, there'll be a demand on the back end to deliver that high definition video experience that they'll need. And then what will also be neat is the transferability to be able to take that from a full-fledged desktop device with a large monitor like I'm looking at now down to my 7-inch mobile device and it not miss a click. The experience is still the same. The real estate of the screen is smaller, but the experience itself should stay the same as we bebop back and forth between all these various devices that we're going to be using in the future. So exciting stuff, man. I appreciate your comments on the teams. That you got me thinking about things that I had not thought about before. And honestly, I need to go back to some of my clients that I've talked to over the last couple of months and start to investigate more about what their team strategy is and how they're going to be using team strategy. So I also appreciate that from a partner level. Man, I've got some work I need to do to maybe do some more prospecting with some of my clients.
I think what we're really...
I got one, Ben. I got one tip for you that we found in our and all this, with specifically around Teams. So you've got the optimization, right, with Citrix for Teams, which does the offloading of it. If you've got a supported endpoint for that, you can get pretty far with that. But what we have found is that when everything works great in that scenario, but once you go to share your screen in a Teams meeting, like it's very typical, right? That for some reason, that's where that redirection doesn't really cover that, and so but we found that GPU handles that piece of it and just kind of smooths off the edge of that part of it, and you now have a fully workable solution. So and that might be something that gets covered in the redirection, but another element I just mentioned is the endpoint, right? So that's another factor in what options are on the table for you. But yeah, there's back to Ben. Yeah, there's
Trevor,
definitely a discussion to revisit with your customers for sure.
Trevor, and I'll just keep running with this car analogy, right? The offloading stuff to me, if you're lucky and you have everything is in the right place at the right time, kind of going back to the car analogy of you just happen to be going down a hill when you go to pass somebody, that's great. But if you want to control your own destiny, right, you got to have that horsepower just kind of waiting in the back end, ready to be used across the spectrum of users. That's kind of what we've come to. Now we know there's a cost there, and we have to advise customers on doing that the right way under the right cost model. And it could be that they just can't afford it. But if you can, that snappy user, that snappy, reproducible user experience is what we really should be, kind of gunning for here, right?
Yeah, I mean that's really our our mission, and that's I think I think in the past it as much as it should have been, I think there's Citrix has got a bad name because there's we haven't really as an industry done a great job making sure that was the case. But there is the new tech with new with the new technology that's out there. I think that we just have a great. I'm excited because I've been doing this since the late '90s. That we have really what we need in order to truly deliver on it. It's not perfect, but it is. It's so far along. I think you're close enough to closer than you've ever been to kind of a normal local PC experience or better. So. Right.
All right. Well, I think we've covered it in detail here, and I think we've kind of left people going, hey, I don't know the exact answer, but I definitely know I need to think about it. Ben, anything else before we let you guys go here regarding this topic or anything else?
No, I'm excited to go back through and see how I can extend the conversation with customers, and I think this is great, man. This is an awesome conversation, and I think what the future lies with Teams and all the conversations we've had around Teams is just an exciting time to be in IT and an exciting time to be working for Citrix.
Yeah, it's like Trevor was pointing out a minute ago, between graphics processing and optimized server workloads and offloading, and the protocols have gotten amazing. We're closer to ever to being able to knock out every piece of what's needed to make this happen in almost every use case. And I'll add one other piece to that too. I started all this in 15K dial-up modems. I've got so much more bandwidth and so much less latency these days to work with. It's kind of the right time for this to really just continue to soar, and then factor in this crazy pandemic thing that's caused more and more people to look at this. The driver is there for sure. Hey, Trevor, how about you? Anything else you want to bring up?
Yeah, I think I'm good. I mean, I just, I'd love to. I appreciate you having me on, and it's definitely something I'm passionate about for sure. So.
I'm going to throw one in for you. We probably have a few listeners out there still that have 6.5 environments. Trevor and his team have done a really good job being able to support legacy Citrix environments, people still running 6.5 as they try to move on to the next versions. That's something Trevor and his team have a good history of, and if that's something you're interested in, definitely reach out to us and let us know. We can help you with that. But with that, guys, I'll let you go. I'm off to the airport. I'm going to go on my got a business trip. Going to fly somewhere. It's been only 2 or 3 times since March, but got to know. I have no choice. So I'm going to be up in Maryland setting up a bunch of iGel units for a customer who has a campus is going to open back up in January. So we'll see how it goes.
Man, that's
good luck.
You got someone to accept your offer, Andy. That's awesome. That's man. There's
well, actually, the truth of this one is we couldn't find anybody else to go do it. I am literally, along with my Bill, who normally joins us. Bill and I are going to be deploying 50 iGel units in a new building on campus of a university the next 2 days. And the reality was we just couldn't get anybody else to do it because nobody else could travel. So here we go.
Wow.
Whatever it takes.
Well, yeah. I just got back from Charleston last week, man, so I'm there with you.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen. Well, thanks for the time. I appreciate the topic, and we'll do it again next week.
Have a good one, Andy. Be safe.
Thank you for listening to the Citrix Session with your hosts, Andy Whiteside and Bill Sutton. A special thanks to our guest for attending today's podcast. Podcast produced by Pete Downing. For any input, or if you'd like to be a part of our podcast, please email us at info@XenTegra.com. Please head over to XenTegra.com/podcast to listen to all podcasts in this series. This podcast is copyrighted by XenTegra LLC.